A war veteran saved a little girl from a burning house. It started as just another quiet afternoon, the kind that slips by unnoticed, neither good nor bad, the kind where even the city feels half asleep, with nothing urgent pressing on the day. The veteran, dressed plainly in a faded coat and worn jeans, his hands deep in his pockets, walked alone along a cracked sidewalk lined with uneven fences and neglected hedges. His pace was slow, almost thoughtful, not because he was in any rush, but because walking like this, without direction, helped with the noise inside his head. People passed him occasionally, young parents pushing strollers, a man talking too loudly into his phone, a pair of teenagers riding skateboards, but none of them gave him more than a glance. He wasn't the kind of famous that drew gasps or selfies. He was a different kind of known, recognized more by older men in diners or security guards in airports, who'd whisper something like respect before quickly moving on. He never made a show of it. The fame, such as it was, never sat comfortably with him. Not after the war, not after everything. As he moved past a familiar row of houses with white porches and toy-strewn lawns, a strange scent made him pause. Not strong at first, more like a whisper of something wrong. He stopped walking, narrowed his eyes, and turned his head slightly. The wind shifted again and brought it back. Sharper this time, acrid, unmistakable. Burning plastic, wood, paint. He looked toward the end of the block and saw nothing at first, just more houses and trees swaying lazily in the wind. But then, just barely visible above the rooftops, a thin ribbon of smoke curled into the sky. It wasn't dramatic yet, not the kind of smoke that screams for help, but he knew better. His body tensed before his mind did. Smoke like that meant something had just started, which meant someone might still be inside. He glanced around, expecting someone else to notice. No one had. A woman across the street kept scrolling on her phone. A man adjusted his sunglasses and got into his car. It wasn't that they didn't care, it was that they hadn't seen, or hadn't looked long enough to understand what they were seeing. That was the difference. He had seen. He knew. He began walking again, this time with purpose, his boots hitting the pavement a little harder, the weight of the air around him beginning to shift. With each step, the smoke became clearer, thicker, more urgent. It was coming from a small two-story home set back behind a scraggly hedge with a broken tricycle lying sideways in the front yard and a plastic kiddie pool turned upside down by the porch. He could see the glow now, not from the front, but dancing inside the windows on the side of the house. The fire had started upstairs. No one was outside. No one was calling for help. The curtains in the top window were already burning, curling black and falling inward like leaves in autumn. He moved toward the front door, which was closed, but not locked. Something in his chest tightened. Not fear exactly, but something just as sharp. He had been in situations where he didn't know what he'd find behind a door. This felt similar. He reached for the handle and hesitated just long enough to listen. The sound of fire was strange, crackling alive with no rhythm but its own. He could hear it now, inside, devouring. Still, no voices. He pushed the door open slowly. The hallway was already thick with smoke, low to the ground, clinging to the floor like fog. He stayed low, instincts guiding him, one hand against the wall for balance. The heat hit immediately, oppressive, dense, and moving fast. He didn't call out yet. His ears were working, straining, and that's when he heard something, faint, barely there. A soft, high-pitched sound. A child, not screaming, crying. The kind of cry that comes when someone is trying not to panic, when fear has turned inward. He moved toward the staircase, barely visible through the thickening haze, and began to climb. Each step creaked under his weight, and the air got worse with every foot he gained. He pulled his coat over his mouth, a poor substitute for real protection, but it was something. Halfway up, the sound came again, clearer this time. A girl. She was somewhere to the left, maybe in a bedroom. He turned at the top of the stairs, heart pounding not from fear, but from the press of heat and adrenaline. Flames danced along the baseboards, still small but moving fast, and the door at the end of the hall was cracked open. He moved toward it, shoulders hunched, one hand shielding his face. The room was a child's bedroom. Stuffed animals on a shelf, a faded cartoon poster above the bed. a small dresser with glowing stickers stuck to the sides. In the corner, crouched low beside the bed, was a girl no older than 5, her cheeks streaked with soot, her eyes wide and glistening. She didn't scream when she saw him. She didn't move at all, just stared. And he knew he couldn't waste a second. He crossed the room, careful not to stumble on the rug, knelt beside her and wrapped her in his coat. She coughed against his chest, small and shallow, and he tightened his hold, shielding her face as best he could. The room was getting worse, the windows alive with fire now, the ceiling starting to groan. He didn't run. He couldn't. But he moved quickly, deliberately, retracing his steps to the hallway, then the stairs, which were already beginning to smolder. A step broke beneath him and he caught himself, twisting slightly to keep the girl safe in his arms. His ankles screamed, but he kept going. Down the stairs, through the hall, back to the door. The front room was almost unrecognizable now, filled with smoke and chaos. He hit the door with his shoulder and stumbled out into the open air, just as the first sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. The girl whimpered but was breathing. He lowered her gently onto the grass and dropped beside her, coughing, eyes burning, skin flushed red from the heat. Behind them, flames broke through the upstairs windows in full, hungry arcs, lighting the sky above like a flare. He looked up at the smoke as it climbed and twisted above them, felt the pain in his chest, the tremble in his hands, and realized only then that people had begun to gather, neighbors stepping out, phones held up, mouths hanging open. But he didn't hear what they said. He didn't care. Something else was coming, something big, but not yet. For now, all he could do was breathe. He ran toward the house without thinking twice, his legs moving faster than they had in years, the pain in his joints swallowed by the surge of adrenaline and something deeper, duty, instinct, whatever it was that had never left him since the war, the thing that always kept him upright when everyone else had scattered. As he neared the burning home, he raised his voice loud and rough, calling out with everything he had left in his lungs, asking if anyone was inside, if anyone could hear him. But there was no answer, only the snarling crackle of the fire feeding hungrily on the bones of the house. He shouted again, more urgently, stepping onto the porch, where the heat was already pushing out like a wave. And just as he was about to cross the threshold, he heard it. A soft, distant cry, muffled, almost fragile, like the world was swallowing it before it could be heard. A child's cry. He froze for a half-second, then stepped inside. It was hotter than anything he remembered. The air clung to his skin, thick and sour, and he immediately dropped low, crouching near the floor where the smoke hadn't completely taken over. The visibility was almost nothing, a swirling blur of gray and black and dancing orange glows leaking through the cracks in the ceiling. He kept calling out as he moved, inching forward along the wall, voice strained but steady, and again he heard it. That same cry, clearer now, coming from above, from somewhere on the second floor. Something cold slid into his stomach, not fear exactly, more like the crushing weight of urgency. Whoever was up there didn't have long. The stairs loomed ahead, smoke curling around each step, and he knew the risk. Old wood, heavy fire, weakened structure. But the sounds upstairs were growing more desperate. Without waiting another second, he climbed. One step at a time, carefully, his body low, head turned sideways, to find whatever pocket of breathable air he could. His eyes watered uncontrollably, and his lungs screamed for relief, but he pushed forward, step after step, until he reached the second floor. Up here, the smoke was worse, as if it had been trapped and was now coiling angrily through the hallways. He held his breath in short bursts, only taking in what he needed, moving carefully toward the sound of the crying that now came from one of the doors at the end of the hallway. The heat here wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unbearable. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips, and the air shimmered like a furnace. One hand pressed against the wall for balance, the other shielding his face. He moved forward, calling again, and this time he heard something. Movement. A shuffle. A cough. Then the cry. It was close now. He reached the room at the end of the hall, its door half open, blackened by smoke. He pushed it open slowly, and inside, through the haze, he saw her. A tiny girl, no older than 5, huddled beneath a bed with a stuffed animal clenched tightly in her arms. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, and she looked up at him without saying a word, her mouth open but silent, as if even her voice had been frightened away. He moved to her quickly but carefully, crouching down and reaching out his hand, palm up. She didn't flinch. She let go of the toy and crawled toward him, and he scooped her into his arms, tucking her against his chest, wrapping part of his coat around her face to protect her from the worst of the smoke. She coughed into the fabric, but she was breathing. That was enough. For now. He stood, the room creaking ominously around them, and turned back toward the hallway. But something had changed. The fire was louder now, a low roar, and the light outside the room had turned red and pulsing. The hallway floor was beginning to warp and sag in places. The smoke was thicker, no longer just drifting, but rushing like a living thing, searching for oxygen, clawing at everything in its path. He didn't run. He couldn't afford to. One misstep on a weakened floor could end everything. He moved deliberately, one foot in front of the other, balancing the child's weight against his shoulder, holding her close, her tiny hand now clutching the collar of his shirt like a lifeline. Halfway down the hall, a part of the ceiling collapsed behind them with a deafening crash, flames shooting upward like a flare, and he instinctively turned his body to shield the girl, his back catching a burst of heat that made him stumble. He recovered, coughing hard now, eyes nearly blind from the sting, and reached the stairs. They were worse than before. The smoke billowed up like a wall, and the bottom step had begun to burn, the wood turning black, soft. He knew they had to move. He adjusted his grip on the girl, whispered something to her. Not that she could hear it, but maybe she felt it, because she tightened her grip around his neck, and together they started down. He didn't test the steps. He moved fast, steady, praying the structure would hold just long enough. A few creaked dangerously underfoot, but they didn't give. Not yet. Near the bottom, another crash. Louder this time. Glass shattering somewhere nearby, and a rush of fresh air blew in from a broken window, fanning the flames and making everything worse. The fire roared now, the kind of sound that makes your bones remember every moment they were close to breaking. He reached the bottom, staggered slightly, then pushed forward toward the front door, barely visible through the thick, swirling air. He could feel his strength slipping. His breath came in ragged bursts. But the girl in his arms was still breathing, still holding on. He reached the door, stumbled against it, slammed his shoulder into it once, then again, and finally it gave way, bursting open with a cloud of smoke that spilled out into the street like a living thing. The light outside was disorienting, almost too bright after so much darkness. He stepped out, legs buckling, knees shaking, and collapsed to the ground, curling his body protectively around the girl as the heat behind them surged one last time. For a moment, everything went quiet. No sirens yet, no shouting, just the crackle of fire and the slow, painful return of breath. He pulled the coat away from the girl's face. She coughed once, blinked up at him, then began to cry, loud, real, living. That sound did something to him. It reached some part of him he didn't think could still be touched. He held her a little tighter, just for a second, then let his arms fall to the ground beside him. Voices now, people shouting, running feet, a car horn in the distance. But he stayed where he was, lying there, the girl sitting beside him now, one hand on his chest, small and warm. The fire behind them raged on, but something else was coming. Something that would change everything. Not yet, but soon. And when it came, the world wouldn't look at him the same way ever again. As he stumbled out of the burning house, the weight of the little girl in his arms somehow both grounding him and pulling him deeper into exhaustion, the sound of distant sirens began to cut through the chaos like a thread of hope. First faint, then swelling louder, closer. Real! The flashing red lights painted the smoke in violent pulses as the fire truck rounded the corner, followed closely by an ambulance, that screeched to a halt on the opposite side of the street. The moment the front door had blown open, neighbors who had been too frightened to approach suddenly appeared from behind parked cars and hedges, drawn by the impossible sight of a soot-covered man cradling a child and collapsing onto the lawn like something out of a different time. He could barely see by then, his vision blurred from the smoke, his chest a tight cage of burning air. But he knew he had made it. He had made it out, and the girl was alive. He clung to that as his body gave way, and he fell to his knees, then sideways onto the grass, still clutching the child, until a pair of hands, gently but firmly, lifted her from his grasp. The paramedics rushed in, checking her vitals, wrapping her in a thermal blanket, shielding her eyes from the swirling ash in the air. The girl reached back toward him with a small, trembling hand before the medic closed the door of the ambulance, and then she was gone, rushed away into the sterile urgency of flashing lights and clinical hands. And he just lay there, sprawled on his side, his breath shallow and erratic, heart pounding like it was trying to punch its way out of his chest. People were yelling around him now, firefighters barking orders, the whir of hoses unraveling, radios crackling with instructions. But for some reason, no one came to him right away. Maybe they assumed he was just another neighbor, someone caught in the shock. Or maybe the chaos was just too much for anyone to focus on one man lying in the grass. He didn't mind. He was used to waiting. He closed his eyes just for a moment and let himself drift in the noise, the adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. He couldn't tell. And finally he felt hands on his shoulder, firm but not rough, shaking him gently. A voice asked if he was okay, if he could hear them. He opened his eyes to see a firefighter kneeling beside him, face shield up, eyes wide with concern. He nodded slightly, coughed hard into his sleeve, and rasped that he was fine. Just needed to catch his breath. Another firefighter helped him sit up, offered him oxygen, but he waved it off with a crooked smile, saying something about needing a bit of patching up, nothing serious. They didn't argue. A paramedic came over with a blanket, which he reluctantly accepted, draping it over his shoulders like a cape he didn't feel he'd earned. As they helped him to his feet, his knees buckled once but held the second time, and he stood there watching the fire be brought under control, the house slowly surrendering to the hiss of water and foam. The crowd had grown now, neighbors, bystanders, someone filming on their phone, and someone finally recognized him. The whispers started. Was that him? The actor? The war vet? It was hard to tell under the soot, but the shape of him was familiar enough. He didn't pay them any mind. His eyes were still on the ambulance that had taken the girl. One of the paramedics, a younger woman with a calm voice and kind eyes, returned after speaking on the radio. She approached him with a soft smile and said, the girl was okay. She had some smoke inhalation, a few scrapes, but she was stable, responsive, even asking about the man who carried her out. He exhaled deeply, and for the first time since stepping into the flames, his shoulders dropped. That night, he didn't go to a hospital. He didn't want to. Instead, after some insistence that he was truly all right, he was taken home by a friend who lived nearby. He showered slowly, the water running black at his feet, and when he emerged, he sat in silence for hours, the TV flickering in the background, news of the fire playing on loop. They didn't mention his name, not yet, but they showed a still frame. Him carrying the girl through the smoke, his face half-shadowed, eyes forward. It looked almost staged, like a scene from a film he might have done 20 years ago. The phone rang the next day. First a local reporter, then a few others, then producers. He ignored them all. He wasn't interested. It wasn't a story to sell. A week later, there was a knock on his door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see the girl's family standing there, mother, father, and the girl herself, now cleaned up, her hair neatly tied, her eyes wide and curious. They didn't say much at first. The mother handed him a small box wrapped in brown paper and string. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of him holding the girl, both of them smiling, flames in the background drawn like waves. Underneath, in uneven letters, it said, "My hero." He didn't know what to say. He nodded, cleared his throat, thanked them. Then, the father offered an invitation to join them for dinner that evening as a thank you, as a way of introducing their daughter to the man who had saved her life. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. That night, in a modest restaurant tucked between a florist and a pharmacy, they sat together sharing a meal. The girl laughed, told him about her favorite cartoons. The mother talked about how quickly everything had happened, how lucky they were she hadn't been alone. The father said little, but his eyes said enough. At one point, the girl reached across the table and held his hand, small fingers wrapping around his own like a promise. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man from a different world. He just felt human. The story would spread eventually. There would be interviews, photos, retrospectives. People would say brave, heroic, inspirational. But he would always remember it as something else, something quieter, a moment, a choice. A little girl with soot on her face and a stuffed animal in her arms, and the feeling that maybe for once he had been exactly where he was supposed to be.